Willie Joe Summerford Monroe, 81, passed away on Wednesday, September 21st, 2022, at Coleman Regional Medical Center. She was born on October 27, 1940, in Morgan County, to James Jackson Summerford and Ruby Morris Summerford. Willie Joe was a very faithful member of the Hartselle Church of Christ, participating in the Lads to Leaders program for many years. She was always helping people in any way possible and took great pride in her work. She was the administrative secretary for Peck Funeral Home, working in the office for 53 years. She loved to cook for her family and community. She was well known for her sourdough bread and supplying bread starters for those who wanted to try their baking skills. She was recognized in the Decatur Daily as the best cook in North Alabama. She was a loving wife, mother, sister, and aunt, and was affectionately known as Miss Willie. Preceding her in death were her husband Ed Monroe and siblings Ralph Summerford, J.J. Summerford, Margaret Campbell, Stella Brown, Hugh Summerford, and Loin Summerford, and her parents. She's survived by her son John Monroe, brother Jack Summerford, and sisters Rachel Fowler, Nina Johnson, and Sandra Angela. Nina wants to let everyone know that she regrets not being able to be here and that her prayers are with the family. A famous poet once said, "Life is not measured by years that you live, but by deeds you do and the joy you give." And I think as we stand here today, that last line of that poem describes the legacy of Miss Willie, the joy you give. Over the last week or so, as I've talked to people in the congregation, or I've read memories of her online, or I've thought of my own interactions with her, there's some overarching words or sets of words that people use, and they're always smiling, always willing to help, and always happy. And that happiness is infectious. That's the joy giver that Miss Willie was. The Bible teaches us that as Christians, we're to shine our light for Jesus. And when you have a connection with Jesus and a true relationship with Jesus, that light that you shine is infectious and it gives joy. And that's what Miss Willie was all about. So I thought I'd share a very quick story with you that someone told me that I think brings home the genuine, infectious nature of her joy that she liked to give everyone. There was a retreat one time that the ladies of the church went to at Bear Creek. And I guess one night the ladies decided to stay up and play a game of spoons. Now, I don't know if you know what spoons is. I didn't know for a long time. I've played it quite a few times with the youth group here now, but it involves spoons, obviously, on a table. And I think there's one less spoon than there are people at the table. It also involves playing cards. And when you get a certain combination of cards, you're supposed to grab a spoon. Now, if you're the first one, you grab the spoon slyly so no one else sees it. And then when people notice, they go bonkers trying to get the rest of the spoons, so they're not the last one that doesn't have one, because that means you're out. Well, that night, Miss Willie lost every game of spoons. She never once saw the first person, and then she just couldn't grab fast enough to get any of the spoons. But even though she lost every game, every single time all those hands hit the table, she busted out laughing like it was the greatest and funniest thing she'd ever seen. And because that laughter and that joy was genuine, it spread to everyone else. And every time they grabbed the spoons, she laughed, they laughed, and it was a night full of joy. Life is not measured by the years that you live, but by the deeds you do and the joy you give. Miss Willie was a joy giver, and as we honor her today, let's remember the joy that she gave. Let's honor her even more by shining our light for Christ and giving others the same kind of joy that she gave us. To her family and friends, we're praying for you. We're here for you. God bless you.
Shamgar had his ox goad. David had his sling. Samson had a jawbone. Rahab, she had a string. Aaron had his rod. Dorcas had her needle. And Miss Willie, she had her Willie bread and her food and a big heart. And all of these, the one thing they had in common was this: they used what they had to the glory of God. So many things I've learned through the years, so many. You wish you could go back and know all those things, don't you? Among the many things that I've learned through life is this: that God takes a person and He takes what the person has. And what He wants to do is just take what you have and use it for His glory. So often in life we don't think we have anything to use for God's glory. We think, yeah, if I could teach, if I could sing, if I could minister in some way, then I could be used for God's glory. But all God asks of any of us is just give Him what we have. Isn't that great? It's that simple. God just asks us to give Him what we have. I think a great illustration of that would be that lad, you remember? 5 loaves and 2 fish. And the thousands, the 5,000. And he took what he had and he went and he gave it to Jesus. And Jesus performed a tremendous miracle and brought glory to God out of those 5 loaves and 2 fish. One of the things I've learned through life is this: that as a child of God, God never really asked for my ability. But what He really asked for is my availability. And that's what Miss Willie did. She just gave Him what she had. She was available. And she says, just use me. One thing that Miss Willie could do was to cook. She had a heart for people. And so she gave it to God. And God took it, and God used it for His glory. So many, many, many ways. She took it and she lived for others. And as a result of that, Miss Willie endured herself to so many, many people. Talmadge Reynolds says, sweet Miss Willie would always tell me that she loved me a bushel and a peck and a hug around the neck. How many of you have heard that from her? I've heard that once. I've heard that 100 times. Don Roniger would say this of Miss Willie: whenever there was some delicious dish or dessert at a fellowship meal, I'd always ask, who made that? And the answer was almost always, Miss Willie. One time I asked her for a recipe. She modestly said, oh, I don't really have a recipe. I just keep putting stuff in it until it tastes good. That's Miss Willie. Lynn Borden said, David and I loved Miss Willie. We admired her love of delicious food and Southern hospitality. Carolyn Jacobs, Miss Willie was so loved by everyone and appreciated for all that she did in our church for so many years. One of the best cooks around. Shandy Thompson Bomar, I always enjoyed seeing Mrs. Monroe when she came to the dentist office. She is the only, and that's in uppercase, capital letters, only. She is the only person I know that would laugh uncontrollably when she would get her teeth polished. She was such a funny lady. Patty Randolph, my precious Aunt Willie, you are a truly amazing woman. I looked up to you my whole life. The love for your family was deep. Boy, was that true, wasn't it? What a closeness that family had. You always had a smile and such an infectious laugh. If you want to know how a person is, just talk to some people that work with them, and especially work with them for many, many, many years. Candy from Peck said this: when I first started at Peck Funeral Home, Jeff had stopped by my home on Saturday and asked me if I could come and work for him while Miss Willie had to have her hip replacement surgery redone. We needed someone to come fill in while she was out recuperating. I said yes, and he wanted me to start the following Monday. I came in, and she, Miss Willie, would not let me touch anything. She said, just watch me. I can do it faster than I can tell you how. So, for a week, I watched and tried to learn all I could. The next week, she finally let me fill out a couple of claim forms for insurance and let me do a little of the computer work. She didn't want me to do death certificates because she was afraid I'd mess up and we would have to amend them. She left after that second week for a surgery and was to be out for 2 months as long as nothing went wrong. I did all I could do and tried my hardest to keep everything done and done well and correct. When she did get back, she was glad that I was able to do most everything without any mistakes. This is so Willie-esque here. After a short time, she went into Jeff's office and asked him, when is she leaving? Saying that she didn't need me, that she could handle the job. She wanted me gone. Jeff told her I was staying, and she wasn't happy. Miss Willie didn't care much for me for about a year, and I finally broke through. We became good friends, and she grew to trust that I was there to help, not to make her go away and be replaced. Years later, when she finally decided she had to retire due to her health issues, she hugged me and said, I'm glad you didn't leave. I can go and know that you'll handle it with the care that the job needs. I loved her so much and will miss her, as most people that knew her will. Jeff Halbrook says, I came to work at Peck Funeral Home in June of 1982. I was blessed to work with a wonderful group of people that really cared about their work. Willie Joe Monroe was large and in charge. She handled just about everything in the office and did it efficiently because she loved people and she loved her job. Every day, everybody that ever dwelt with Willie at the funeral home always asked for her from then on. And that was a bunch of folks. In fact, I'll insert this. Dale was telling me that before Facebook ever came out, Miss Willie was the Facebook of Hartselle. That it was amazing how so many people called Peck Funeral Home and wanted Willie because Willie knew everything that was going on in town, and they got their information from Willie. Back to Jeff. One of the things I found out about Willie was her work ethic. She had one, and she didn't mind expecting you to have the same. Don't quit until the work is done, she would say. You ever see Willie direct a funeral? Well, I have. Not many, but I have. And she was large and in charge when she directed a funeral. One that I'm thinking about was, I didn't know she was in charge, but I was running late, and usually the minister gets there when the family gets there, and they all have prayer with the family. And I was running late for some reason. Boy, Miss Willie got on the phone, and she called me, and she let me know I was supposed to be at that funeral home, and I need to get to the funeral home. Well, it was in that same funeral that afterwards, you go get in the car, and the preacher has a place to park out there, and so you wait, the policemen that are waiting, and then you're waiting, you're looking in your rearview mirror, and you're waiting for the hearse, okay, to come up behind you so you can go. And so I'm waiting, and all of a sudden I see the hearse pull out. And I'm thinking, there's nobody driving that thing. There's nobody driving that thing. And I kept looking in my mirror, and that hearse kept just creeping up behind me. And all of a sudden, as it got closer, I saw this little knob behind the steering wheel, knob of a head, and it was Miss Willie driving that hearse. She was large and in charge. Going back to Jeff, I was always amazed when Brown Service Insurance Company would call for Willie if they ever had a question about a burial policy and how to handle it. The company, mind you, called Willie. They knew that however Peck Funeral Home and Miss Willie was handling it, it would certainly be the right way. One of the first things that I found out about her was that her wedding was the very first service in the Peck Funeral Home chapel. That was cool and weird. I remember one year we were on our last leaders convention trip up in Nashville, and that was when Ralph Emery show was real big, if you remember, on the Country Channel. And so they loved, Ed and Willie loved Ralph Emery show. And so they decided, when we got up there early, they decided they would go and see if they could get tickets into the Ralph Emery show. And they did. And while they were standing out in line, there were people coming and asking them questions. And strange things happen, what's unusual happened in your life. And Ed and Willie told them they were married in a funeral home. So that night on TV, they were told to stand up, and they got recognized for being married in a funeral home. She loved that. She talked about that for so much. Back to Jeff. Willie loved big. Her husband, Ed, her son, John, her church, and that she helped raise that little preacher, Philip Hines. Yeah. And she did. She did. She loved Auburn Tigers football, War Eagle, her co-workers, and her family. She was all about her family. She loved her heritage and the Summerford family and was always excited about family reunions. War Eagle. Every Sunday, when Auburn won, Willie was going to find me and give me a War Eagle. I mean, it was it. And I promise you, and I never did tell her this, but I promise you, on the Sundays when Auburn beat Alabama, I avoided her. I didn't want to hear it because she was going to be a bigger War Eagle than ever. But she loved giving those. Back to Jeff. I would go on and on about Willie. I loved her so much. She always treated our children as good as her own. We went trick-or-treating at her house, and she gave them too much. Every birthday, they always got something, Ronald McDonald bucks or something like that. But finally, Willie was one of the best cooks in the world. If Willie cooked it, it was good. She cooked for everybody and cooked a bunch. She had to go home from work during the day, sometimes just to feed Herman the homemade bread, Willie bread starter. Willie was always sharing it, and I loved her ice cream cake. I never got any of that, Jeff. I'm envious. I love you, Willie Summerford Monroe, and I thank you for all you've done for me. See you again someday at home. Arthur said, here's some things I remember, Arthur Peck. Number one, the sneeze. Number two, her ability to laugh at herself and joyful attitude, what Todd talked about. The fried turkeys and Willie bread. And number 4, her rendition of the happy birthday song and her determination to sing it to you on your birthday. And then Johnny Rowe says this. Johnny says, when I began working at Peck Funeral Home back in the late 80s, Willie and I soon became friends. As I worked there more, I would help Willie in the office. She helped me to understand the business and taught me the ropes. One day she asked me to read over some notes so she could write out an obituary column. I helped her as asked, and we began to make full sentences out of the abbreviated notes. We worked on the obituary, and soon she said, "It's close to lunch, I'll buy, and you go pick up lunch." So I did. As we shared lunch that day, we talked about family, friends, gardening, and life in general. What a great time we had together, just eating lunch and talking. Willie was a kind person. She loved her family, working at the funeral home and going to church. She was always doing for other people, no matter where it was, church, community, or at work. Willie was a wonderful cook. Every so often, she would plan a meal for all the employees here at Peck's, with help from 2 ladies that cleaned the funeral home in Gail Peck. What an enjoyable time we all had, and delicious cooking, because those ladies knew how to cook. Now, if Johnny says that, you know they know how to cook. Around 5 or after, I helped her load things in her car, and she always told me exactly where to put things. This is Willie. Be it the trunk, the front seat, or the back seat, or wherever. She said, "Thanks, and be careful." And I said, "Thank you for all you do for us." Watching her drive out of the parking lot, I felt so blessed to know Willie. As years working together passed, Willie became more like a sister than a friend. She and I had much in common. We laughed a lot and cried a little. Willie, thank you for your love, thoughts, understanding, and care. I'll never forget and always remember, for I know where you are. Farewell, my friend. Farewell. Those of you who've heard me do funerals in the past, and I have done many, know that many times I will say, when I hear someone's death or I'm there, I'll think of a passage or a story in the Bible. The same thing was true with Willie. Immediately, and I hadn't thought about this before, but immediately after her hearing of her passing, I thought of a passage in Acts 9 and a woman named Dorcas. Because you see, Dorcas was so much like Willie in that she lived her life for others. Dorcas took her needle as Willie took her food, and she used it to God's glory. You remember the story there? She made such wonderful things with needles, garments, and coats, and she dies. And she made them for the widows. And the widows are crying, and they're showing Peter as he shows up these beautiful things that Dorcas had done. Let me show you just 2 or 3 tidbits of this story, because it's so Willie. We find in verse 36, the first part of verse 36, who she was. It says at Joppa there was a certain disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. Tabitha is her Jewish name. Dorcas is her Aramaic name for the Greek and the Jew. That's impressive in itself. But notice it says she was a certain disciple. This woman had a beautiful, beautiful spiritual life. So did Willie. The Lord and the church were number one in her life. And oh, how she loved this church. She was a disciple of the Lord. You see, a disciple is one who dedicates himself to follow and to serve Jesus. And when you follow Jesus, you walk down the same way of Jesus. And so what that means is that you go down the same road with him, and therefore when you can worship Jesus, you worship. And she was here whenever the doors were opened, as we sometimes say. It means when you're a disciple of Jesus that you're more important about God's will and not your will. You're more concerned about others and not yourself. That was Miss Willie. One of the things that she was so involved in for many years was Lads to Leaders, and you've heard that mentioned. Lads to Leaders touches the lives of young men and women, thousands and thousands and thousands across America, in the Philippines, in Romania, in India, and many other places in the world. It's involved with training young people in leadership roles. And for many years, Ed and Willie would go up to Nashville, and we would have the convention up there on Easter weekend, and there'd be 8,000, 9,000 people there just at the Upland Hotel. And they'd set up, they took care of the information center. And they worked hard to prepare for it before they went up there. They'd get up early in the morning, they'd work all day long, and they would tell people where to go and what to do and what was going on. And they gave their heart and they gave their soul, because she was a disciple. Notice it says her name was Dorcas. Dorcas means gazelle. And it's a symbolic of gracefulness. That's Willie. It speaks of one who has an inward beauty. You see, Dorcas was the woman of Proverbs 31. She was the New Testament example of the woman of Proverbs 31. And Miss Willie, she is this day and time's example of the lady in Proverbs chapter 31. But notice what she did more importantly in the second part of verse 36. It said the woman was full of good works and charitable deeds. Now we know what her good works were because we've already mentioned it. We find in verse 39 what they were. She took her needle and she made clothes for widows. She gave them to them. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I thought, as I was reading that, I wonder how many widows would have done without if it hadn't been for Dorcas, the garments that she had made. You see, that was compassion. It was a compassionate act of kindness. That's what compassion is. In fact, notice it says she was full of good works and charitable deeds. That speaks really of the compassion. Because that's what compassion is. See, compassion reaches out not only with the heart. It's one thing to have heart, but real compassion is when it reaches out from the heart with the hands. It involves the heart and it involves the feet. And notice it says she was full of good works and she was full of charitable deeds. That's the same word, going back to that story about the young lad giving the fish and the loaves. And it says when they got finished and Jesus fed 5,000, they were filled. What a filling. Well, it's the same Greek word here. She was full of it. And what that means is that it wasn't just on Sunday. And it wasn't just on Monday, or it wasn't one day a week, or one day a month, or 1 week a month, or 1 month a year. But she was full of it. She was consumed with meeting the needs of others. And notice it said, which she did. She did day by day, week by week, and year after year. Here's the last thing I want to mention to you about Dorcas. There's a tragedy that happens. Verse 37 says she was sick and she died. Anytime a great servant of God who just simply takes what they have and just gives it to the Lord, anytime they pass on, there's a big hole in that church. And you sometimes will wonder, God, why? When such a wonderful saint like this dies, don't you understand, God, what you've taken away? Well, no matter how good we may be, what happens to the unjust happens to the just. In many ways, you'll never fill the shoes of Miss Willie. But here's the thing. The story ends in a tremendous way. And so it does for Miss Willie. Verse 39 through 41, listen. And then Peter arose and went with them. And when he had come, they brought him to the upper room, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all out and knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes. And when she saw Peter, she sat up. And he gave her his hand and lifted her up. And when he had called the saints and widows, he presented her alive. That same thing is going to happen one day for Miss Willie. Same thing. She's going to hear the shout of the Lord when he comes back. He's going to say, arise. And like all of God's people, she'll come back from the dead. And she'll rise to meet the Lord in the air. And just as it was a great time of celebration and praise for Dorcas, that's the way it's going to be one day for all of God's people and for Miss Willie. Here's how we'll end today. Dorcas, she took her needle and she embroidered her name into history. Miss Willie, she took her food and she took her bread and she cooked her way into the hearts of many. I ask you today, what do you have? What do you have that you can give to God? That's all he wants from you is what you got. So that you can give to God. And like Miss Willie, use it for her glory. God's glory. God's glory. She'll be missed. And she was so special to this church. And she has left for all of us a wonderful, wonderful example of just taking your life and what you have and just making it available to God. Pray with me. Father, today we ask you to be with this family. We know the closeness of the family. We know the many trips the sisters took together and the love they shared and had for each other. We are aware of the hurt somewhat in John's life. Not like you are aware, but we are aware of the hurt in John's life. We ask that you bring comfort. Give him that assurance that there's a better home awaiting for Miss Willie. And help this family never forget the kindness of her heart, the generosity she had for others, and the love that she had for you. We always pray that you give us more folks like Miss Willie, more folks that are just willing to serve, and take what they have and give it. Thank you. Thank you for the privilege of being able to just know her and be a part of her life. And thank you for raising me and helping me in so many ways that she did in those younger days. In Jesus' name, amen.